It was a routine traffic stop, or so it seemed. A white cop pulls over a black surgeon on his way to the hospital, unaware that this moment will soon spiral into something no one could have imagined. The officer, just doing his job, arrests the doctor, never realizing that the man in front of him is about to perform life-saving surgery on his own son. As the tension builds, the clock is ticking, and the surgeon's skills are desperately needed in the operating room. What happens next is a dramatic collision of duty, fate, and human resilience. The officer's actions set off a chain of events that leave everyone questioning their assumptions and their roles in this world. How will the surgeon's future unfold? Will the officer realize his mistake in time? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this incredible story. The surgeon, Dr. Marcus Harris, had spent years honing his craft, saving countless lives, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His son, Jason, was lying in the hospital just a few miles away, battling for his life after a brutal accident. Every second counted. Yet here he was, handcuffed and frustrated, as the officer barked orders he didn't understand. The tension in the air was thick, the officer's suspicion rising with every word. Dr. Harris tried to explain, his heart racing, but the words were lost on the cop, who had no way of knowing the urgency of the situation. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Jason's condition was worsening. Doctors and nurses were desperately trying to stabilize him, but without his father, the surgery was in jeopardy. Time was running out, and the question remained, would the surgeon be freed in time to save his son? The officer, Officer Daniels, had no idea who Dr. Harris was. To him, Harris was just another man who seemed too eager to avoid the routine questioning. His mind, clouded with assumptions, couldn't shake the suspicion that something wasn't right. In his eyes, Dr. Harris was just another driver who tried to evade a simple traffic stop. But if he had known that the man he was about to arrest was the surgeon who could save his own son, things might have played out very differently. Back at the hospital, Jason's condition deteriorated. Doctors were becoming more anxious, unable to proceed without Dr. Harris. The surgeon had pioneered techniques in trauma care, techniques that Jason needed desperately. Without him, the operation was a risky gamble. The staff, aware of the urgency, couldn't help but wonder what could be keeping him away. Everyone could sense that something was wrong, but they couldn't yet put the pieces together. As Officer Daniels led Dr. Harris to the squad car, the surgeon's thoughts raced. Every second mattered. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "My son is dying." But Daniels, still convinced he was dealing with just another defiant motorist, didn't even look up. His mind was on the rules, the procedure, and the paperwork waiting back at the station. The more they argued, the more the tension built. It wasn't just a matter of an arrest anymore. It was a matter of life and death. Dr. Harris couldn't fathom the idea that a single misunderstanding, a wrong turn in the system, might cost him the chance to save his son. What seemed like a simple mistake was unraveling a much deeper tragedy. Would anyone realize the severity of the situation before it was too late? With each passing minute, the situation grew more desperate. Officer Daniels, now behind the wheel of his patrol car, tried to maintain control, his grip tight on the steering wheel as he drove toward the station. Dr. Harris, in the backseat, was seething with frustration, his mind racing. Every minute felt like a lifetime. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered under his breath, but Daniels didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, still oblivious to the magnitude of his mistake. Inside the squad car, Dr. Harris' mind shifted from anger to fear. He thought of his son, the life they had built together, and the many nights spent with him talking about the future. Jason had always dreamed of becoming a doctor, too. Now that future hung by a thread, and Dr. Harris felt powerless to stop it. Back at the hospital, Jason's vitals were crashing. The team had tried everything to stabilize him, but without the expertise of Dr. Harris, they were fighting a losing battle. Nurses rushed around, their faces pale with anxiety. The hospital's chief surgeon paced, visibly distraught. The one man who could save Jason was trapped, miles away, in the back of a police car. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the cold window. The flashing red and blue lights outside blurred as tears welled in his eyes. His heart raced as time slipped through his fingers. What if it was already too late? What if the damage was done? In that moment, the reality hit him hard. He wasn't just fighting for his son's life anymore. He was fighting against time, against bureaucracy, and against his own helplessness. And worse still, he could feel the walls closing in, knowing that Officer Daniels was about to make a decision that could either set him free or seal Jason's fate forever. Just as the weight of the situation seemed unbearable, an unexpected turn took place. Officer Daniels' radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. "Daniels, we need you back at the station." "Priority call." The dispatcher's voice echoed through the car. The officer grunted in frustration but responded, turning the wheel sharply to head toward the station. His mind was already preoccupied with the paperwork, the arrest, and what he saw as an inconvenient delay in his shift. Dr. Harris, now on the edge of panic, seized the opportunity. He knew if he didn't act fast, he might lose everything. With every fiber of his being, he tried to think of a way out, some method to make the officer understand the gravity of the situation. As they neared a quiet street corner, the tension in the air seemed to thicken. The flashing lights reflected on nearby windows, painting the scene in a stark, almost surreal light. Suddenly, Officer Daniels slammed on the brakes. Ahead, in the distance, a squad car swerved into view. It was a backup unit, one that Daniels hadn't expected. And then, a twist Dr. Harris hadn't anticipated. A familiar face emerged from the new squad car. It was his old colleague, Detective Miller. Officer Daniels was still frozen, trying to catch up to the situation. But before he could say anything else, Harris was out of the squad car, running toward the now empty street corner. His mind was foggy, clouded with panic, but adrenaline surged through him, propelling him forward. But just as Harris reached for his phone to call the hospital, a deep voice cut through the air, sending a chill down his spine. "Dr. Harris." It was a voice he recognized. Turning slowly, Harris's heart sank. Standing there, his face grim, was his own brother Tom. Tom was a cop too, working undercover for years, but now there was something different about him, something unsettling in his eyes. "Tom, what are you doing here?" Harris asked, his voice cracking. Tom didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "I should have told you earlier," he began, his voice heavy. "But I had to make sure you were doing the right thing for Jason." Confusion rippled through Harris's mind. "What do you mean, the right thing?" Tom sighed, pulling out a piece of paper from his jacket and handing it to Harris. It was a note, an anonymous tip. A tip that had been placed under Tom's door hours ago, warning him about someone sabotaging Jason's surgery. The hospital was compromised, and if Harris didn't act fast, they would lose his son for good. "Someone knew you were coming, Marcus. Someone who wanted to stop you from saving him." Tom's voice trembled, and it was clear. This was more than just an arrest. It was a conspiracy, one that had targeted Harris and his family for reasons they still didn't fully understand. As Harris' eyes scanned the note, a wave of realization washed over him. His brother, the cop who had always stood by him, had been trying to protect him from a far-reaching plot. But now, with time running out, they had no choice but to trust each other and race to the hospital together. With one final look at his brother, Harris turned toward the car. There was no time to waste. But as they drove toward the hospital, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle wasn't just over his son's life. It was for the truth. And that truth, he now realized, was far darker than he could ever have imagined. As Dr. Harris and his brother Tom rushed to the hospital, they knew time was their biggest enemy. When they finally arrived, the surgical